Vulnerability. It's a word that can send shivers running down your spine as you remember that time you overshared with your coworker and felt instant regret. Or maybe it reminds you of the time that you bawled your eyes out at that beautiful but heart-wrenching TV commercial in the middle of the electronics store. Or maybe vulnerability brings flashbacks to your first colonoscopy. The point is, vulnerability has gotten a bit of a bad rap over the years. Many people associate it with weakness, risk, and exposure, especially in the case of the colonoscopy. And honestly, I can't blame them. If you look at the way the almighty dictionary defines vulnerability, it's all about being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. Geez Louise, right? I mean, I bring up the cliche dictionary definition here because how we define things in the dictionary is very similar to how we define things in our lives. We experience something, we qualify and catalog that experience, and we use that definition as a barometer for similar experiences going forward. And I believe this is why many of us adults are challenged with the idea of vulnerability. Somewhere along the course of our lives, we created a definition of what vulnerability is. And depending on our experience, we either qualified it as a good thing, to be embraced, or as a bad thing, to be avoided at all costs. And the sad reality is that many of us have had a negative experience with being vulnerable. And so we've stopped being vulnerable out of fear. So today, I want to change your definition of vulnerability. So here I am, at the risk of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally, proposing the following idea. Vulnerability is the key to real fun and fulfillment in life. And if you want proof of this, look no further than our world's tiniest teachers, children. Children have the fullest capacity for fun, and they're also some of the most willingly vulnerable human beings on the planet. A child will rarely hold back how they really feel about a situation. They express themselves fully, and they also have some of the most fun. And this is no coincidence. If you think back to some of the most fun times you had in your childhood, I'm willing to bet that you approach those situations with a sense of openness and vulnerability. When I was a kid, I used to put everything on the line in the name of fun. My mind, my body, my reputation. I remember one time when I was a kid, I stuck this large stick in the ground in my front yard, and I stood in front of it like this. And I just pretended to be a scarecrow as the cars drove by. Nobody was convinced, by the way, but I sure had a lot of fun expressing myself. And I remember I would also make up songs about my dog. Her name was Mocha. And I'd belt them at full volume riding around on my bike. And they all went around and they shouted to the town, Mocha! Mocha! Bing, bing. Now you'll be shocked to know that despite the depth and meaning behind those lyrics, I'm neither a professional lyricist nor a trained singer. Shocking, I know. And I would also be physically vulnerable as I played. Remember one time I shared my rollerblades with my cousin, and we raced each other down this hill, wearing one skate each. As you can imagine, that last one was a little foolhardy, but I survived. I'm here telling you about it right now. And let me say, I've got some really cool scars to remind me of all the fun I had when I was a kid. In these moments, and many more, I was 100% vulnerable. And as kids, we express ourselves fully. We are open to the possibilities and the consequences. And we create our own worlds without fear of judgment. But still, somewhere along the way, we decide that vulnerability is a weakness. For me, that moment came shortly after I started school. On top of being a particularly creative and wild kid, I was also incredibly sensitive. Despite my outgoing nature at home, when I got to school, I was shy, uncertain, and rather emotionally volatile. Seriously, I would cry at the drop of a crayon. And this made it really difficult to form friendships sometimes. I wanted so desperately just to be liked by all of the other kids, but often I was left out. And shortly after starting kindergarten, I embarked on a 9-year-long journey of being bullied for being sensitive. Some of the kids would like to taunt me until I'd finally cry. They'd call me names. They told me they didn't want me around. And I even had my safety threatened. I remember one time some kids even came and threw fruit at my house and then urinated on my bike for good measure. And they were so pleased to tell me about it later. Now, all of this punishment seemed to stem from my emotions, from my vulnerability. And so I had to teach myself how to shut that down in order to protect myself. Now, eventually, I moved to a new city, and the harassment stopped. I had a clean slate. Nobody knew who I was. But still, I continued to shut down that vulnerability, just in case. I now had a new definition of what vulnerability was, and so I acted accordingly. And it took a really, really long time, but eventually I learned how to stop crying in public so much. And then I stopped crying at home. I shared very minimal details about myself with the new friends that I was making. I didn't want to risk them finding out who I really was and running off, or something worse. And so I defaulted to being the most excellent listener ever, rather than the person who ever expressed how they're really feeling inside. And all of this, I did this was done out of a need for safety, but I know that I missed out on a lot of fun, important, and new experiences along the way out of fear. And this trend followed me through my post-secondary studies and through my career. I missed out on friendships. I isolated myself and internalized my entire world. And I developed some pretty wicked anxiety along the way, too. Now, what you've just heard is something that happens to a lot of us throughout our lives. We let an experience, or a collection of experiences, turn into a dictionary definition, a foreshadowing of what's to come. But we forget something pretty darn important, that we have the power to rewrite our definitions and to rewrite our stories. Because while my story of being harassed and isolated and bullied may seem hopeless or cruel, the reality is that I had many, many moments in my life where even just a pinch of vulnerability totally saved me. It brought me fun and fulfillment and purpose to my life. And it came through little things. It came through hanging all my self-judgments at the door and enthusiastically role-playing a character in a game of Dungeons and Dragons. I am Craftinia, halfling druid, leader of the spider people, possible werewolf. It came through putting my mind and my body to the test and hiking the West Coast Trail, a 75-kilometer trek through beautiful, rugged terrain. And let me tell you, I have never had so much fun beating my feet to a pulp and not showering for a week. But seriously, it was amazing. And it came through finally telling my partner that I loved him, and going on to have the best relationship and friendship of my life. These moments were some of the most fun and exciting, and they're also some of the most vulnerable. And so over the years, I've been playing with this idea that vulnerability is actually the key to real fun and fulfillment in life. And so I've been experimenting with something I call vulnerable fun. It's like dipping your toe into the shallow end of the vulnerability pool and slowly wading out as far as you can. Because being vulnerable doesn't mean you have to immediately hurl yourself into the deep end of the pool and confess all your secrets to a stranger on the street. You can start small. And so here are some things that I've done over the years to become more vulnerable that you can totally do too. So I've walked down a street by myself with people on it, and I've sung a song out loud. And you've heard the quality of my singing. Because expressing yourself can be vulnerable fun. And I've done live videos on social media where I've talked about my mental health journey. Because being honest about where you are and where you've been can also be vulnerable fun. And I've even had a conversation with one of those electronic checkout machines at the grocery store. How did we do today? You did a great job, you know? You reminded me to put my bags in the bag area. It's just swell. Good job, Miss Robot. Because expressing your imagination can be vulnerable fun. And I've hiked hundreds of trails because challenging yourself physically can be vulnerable fun. And finally, I've stood here right now and shared my views on vulnerability. Because expressing your ideas can be vulnerable fun. And as I collect more experiences that are vulnerable, my definition of what it is and what it gives me continues to change. And so if you are tired of feeling like vulnerability is all about being exposed to the possibility of being either attacked, either physically or emotionally, forget all that. I've got a new definition for you. Vulnerability is the courage to express yourself authentically and to be fully present in this world. And this world needs more self-expression, authenticity, and presence, now more than ever. So now, stop being so serious and go have some vulnerable fun.